what's going on YouTube, and welcome back to another Season 7 League of Legends Champion Guide. Today, I'm going to cover Lissandra, the Ice Witch.
I will bury the world in ice.
Lissandra is a champion that received a couple small buffs in 7.8 and is pretty decent in the mid and top lane. She's a champion with a pretty decent amount of crowd control, and if you are looking for that in your team comp, she is a very reliable pick. She also has pretty strong roams because she can get right on an enemy champion with her E ability and then crowd control them and follow up with damage. This also gives her a really strong way to initiate a fight, and she can also use that E ability as an escape to leap away as well. Then finally, with her multiple ways of doing AoE damage, she has amazing wave clear. If the enemy mid laner decides to leave lane, you can shove minions under his tower pretty much immediately. Now Lissandra, however, is a very short range mage. Her Q, W, and ultimate don't have the longest ranges out there, but you can use your E ability to get into a short range. She also has some pretty damn long cooldowns early on, and she's a very mana hungry champion. The buff to your passive will help a little bit with this, but it's still going to be an issue. Finally, Lissandra is somewhat hard to master. Definitely not the hardest out there either, but a lot harder than something like an Annie. Learning how to use your ultimate properly may take a little bit of time. It's great on an enemy champion to CC them so you can do your damage, but it's also fantastic on you as a defensive. It's pretty much a Zhonya's that heals. For my Masteries, I like to go 18 Cunning and 12 Ferocity, grabbing Thunderlord's Decree as my Keystone Mastery. Lissandra can pull off some really quick combos, and having that Thunderlord's Decree will add even more damage and give you a higher kill threshold. The rest of the Masteries are pretty self-explanatory, but I do like to get that mana regeneration because she definitely has some mana issues. For an alternative, you could go for Deathfire Touch as well. Your Q ability is pretty easy to poke with, and this of course will increase its damage. It is a decent alternative, but I definitely like sticking with Thunderlord's Decree for that added burst. For my runes, I like to go for Magic Penetration Reds, Scaling Health Yellows, Magic Resist Blues, and Ability Power Quints. This is a very standard rune page, and it's great against AP mid laners. If you were against an AD mid laner though, then you'd probably want Armor Yellows instead. Either way, the magic penetration and the ability power make your poking and last hitting a lot easier, and the scaling health and magic resist gives you some nice tankiness. If you do have multiple rune pages, then I would set up one as well that does have armor yellows in case you're against a strong AD mid laner like Talon or Zed. For your first summoner spell, you'll want to pick up Flash. Even though you already have a pretty solid escape ability, you are still a very squishy champion, and it can save you in all sorts of different situations. It's also great when used defensively if you flash to close a gap on an enemy and then go for an all-in. Teleport is then my favorite summoner spell for my second slot on Lissandra. It will give you even more map pressure and allow you to roam even better. You'll even have the option of split pushing during the game if you did take Teleport. If you're instead looking to add some kill pressure in the lane, then you could take Ignite. It's great for securing kills and is fantastic for reducing healing effects from strong healing champions like Swain and Soraka. Your passive ability is Iceborne, and it's great for helping you sustain your mana. Lissandra's next ability periodically costs no mana. Iceborne's cooldown is reduced by 1 second every time Lissandra applies crowd control to an enemy with her abilities, excluding crowd control spell effects from items. So this is a pretty decent passive because Lissandra is a very mana hungry champion, and this of course can make some spells have no mana cost. As long as you're applying your crowd controls, it will be reduced. That's pretty much all there is to the ability. Just make sure you're hitting the enemy champion with your Q ability because it is a slow and of course a crowd control and will reduce the time on that passive. Your Q ability is Ice Shard, and this is your main way of harassing the enemy champion and also last hitting minions. When activated, Lissandra hurls a Spear of Ice in a line which deals magic damage to the first enemy it hits and slows them for 1.5 seconds. The spear then shatters and passes through the main target, dealing the same magic damage to all other enemies hit. This also has a 725 range, which is pretty decent, and a 70% AP ratio with between a 16 and 28% slow. It's also got a pretty low cooldown, so since it's spammable damage with a scaling slow, we have to max this one first. It's really amazing in the lane phase because you can use this to last hit minions and still poke the enemy champion that will be behind those minions. That is exactly how you want to use this ability. Clear up minion waves and poke the enemy champion as much as possible. Your W is Ring of Frost, and this is a really solid AoE rooting ability that also does some pretty decent damage. When activated, Lissandra freezes all nearby enemies, dealing them magic damage and briefly rooting them. It has a 450 range, which is pretty decent, a 40% AP ratio, and a scaling root duration, making it a really solid ability to put points into. Since this doesn't have the longest range out there, it's going to be kinda hard to get on the enemy champion, unless of course you use your E ability to jump onto the enemy. Generally, your combo will consist of you using your E ability to jump on the enemy, using this to root them in place, and following up with your Q ability for damage. If you do however have your ultimate available, you could follow it after your ultimate so you can chain CC. Of course, if you are trying to escape from an enemy, you can use this to root them and then try to run away. Your E is Glacial Path, and this is some really solid mobility which is great for escaping or engaging. When activated, Lissandra casts a Claw of Ice that moves forward in a line, dealing magic damage to all enemies it passes through. Reactivating Glacial Path consumes the Claw and blinks Lissandra to its final location. This has a 1050 range, which is pretty decent because you can engage from a pretty long distance and a 60% AP ratio. The cooldown also goes down 3 seconds every time we put a point in the ability, so if you're looking for added mobility, then this is viable to max second. To use this ability, usually you're going to want to use it from out of sight if possible, so you can catch the enemy off guard, and when you get there, use either your W to hold them in place, or your ultimate. Of course, if the enemy is coming in for a gank, you can toss this backwards and use it to escape as well. Since you have to wait for it to travel, you can even use your W ability to root them, and then jump away. Your ultimate is Frozen Tomb, and this is great offensively to kill a target, or defensively to save your own life. When casted on an enemy, Lissandra freezes the target enemy champion, stunning the target for 1.5 seconds. If self-cast, Lissandra entombs herself, placing herself in stasis for 2.5 seconds while healing herself with the heal increased by 1% for every 1% missing health. Black Ice then spreads from Frozen Tomb's target and lasts for 3 seconds, dealing magic damage to all enemies in the area as it expands and slowing them while they remain within. So this here is a really strong ultimate because it's great in offensive situations and of course defensive situations. I usually like to use it offensively as much as I can and make sure I get a squishy carry inside so I can delete them with the rest of my abilities. If you do get caught out though, this is a really solid defensive. It's a longer duration Zonias that even heals you, and it's even stronger if you're missing more health. Even though you're primarily using it as a defensive in that scenario, it can still do some nice damage because of the black ice that will spread from you. For your skill order, you first want to put a point in your ultimate whenever you can at 6, 11, and 16. Then you want to focus on maxing your Q ability first for its really high poke damage and wave clear. Then you have the option of maxing either your W or your E second. Generally I'll max my W ability second because I like that little increase in the root duration and of course the lower cooldown. If you were planning to roam more often or you felt like you just needed some increased mobility, then you could max your E second as well. It's also very viable. Generally though, I'll just take one early point at level 3 so I can actually use it to escape and engage, and then save it for last. For your all-in combo, you first start by using your E ability to close a gap on an enemy champion, and use your Hextech Protobelt if you did buy one, and then use your ultimate on the enemy. At that point, use your Q ability to deal damage, and your W ability to chain crowd control. Once your Q comes off cooldown, use it again to finish off the enemy champion. Next, we use both our E and W abilities to escape from an enemy champion. Here you just want to start your E ability, root the enemy with your W ability, and then activate your E again to jump away. Lissandra has a pretty decent lane phase. You'll be able to bully short-range champions with your Ice Shard harassment, and you can use your Glacial Path as a really reliable way to escape ganks. If your jungler is coming in for a gank, make sure you save your Glacial Path so you can move forward onto the enemy champion and then root them with your Ring of Frost. It's really easy to gank Lissandra's lane because of all the crowd control that is in her kit. When you're level 6, you have even more kill pressure, and you should be looking at a kill with your Frozen Tomb. Follow up with your Ring of Frost to chain crowd control, and of course, the rest of your damage. In teamfights, you'll first want to get off a really good Frozen Tomb. Now there are, however, 2 main ways you will want to use this ability. The first would be on a really squishy enemy carry so you can follow up with the rest of your team and get yourself a really easy kill. The second, of course, would be on yourself if you are getting focused and you want to use that stasis and get some healing. If you do decide to use it on yourself, you want to try to be in the middle of a team fight so you will get that black ice on the enemy champions and do some damage and of course slow them. Besides this, you'll just want to focus on keeping enemies in place as much as you can with Ring of Frost and of course spamming your Ice Shard for its damage. Keep in mind as well, if your team does have multiple divers, you can always dive onto the backline with them with your E ability. Now let's look at a couple hard matchups, and first up is Ahri. Ahri is probably the best mid laner out there, and of course is pretty hard for you to deal with. She'll be able to use all of her mobility and her burst to just bring you down pretty much instantly. Against an Ahri, you'll want to play a lot more defensively and save your ultimate for when she tries to engage onto you. As long as you get some help from a teammate or you are way ahead, you should have more than enough time to bring down an Ahri before she can jump back out. Next here I have Jace, who's insanely hard to deal with because of his ridiculous poke damage and really high damage combos. You'll really have to make sure you dodge his accelerated shock blast because if it lands over and over again, you're going to lose a lot of health, and then he's just going to finish you with his hammer combo. Yet again, be a lot more defensive, and when he does try to pull off a hammer combo, you can always ultimate him and trade a lot of damage back. Next here I've got Syndra, who's easily one of the top 10 mid laners out there and can do a ridiculous amount of burst damage. Since Lissandra is a pretty short range mid laner, she's going to have to be pretty close to Syndra to last hit, and that's going to be a big issue. Syndra's stun combo is really long range, and when she combines her ultimate, you're pretty much just gonna instantly die. Trade when you know her abilities are in cooldown, otherwise be a lot more defensive. Last here I've got Ziggs, who's one of the best mid laners in solo queue right now. He's yet again going to be really hard for Lissandra because of his very high range, and of course Lissandra has that short range, and she's going to take a lot of poke damage. She also has to wait a couple seconds to get off a long range E ability, and if she doesn't do it in time, Ziggs can get off a really good ultimate and just kill her. Yet again, get whatever farm you can and try your best to dodge his poke. Now last here, let's look at your item build, which starts with a Doran's Ring, Health Potion, and a Warding Totem. For my core build, I like to go for Hextech Protobelt, Zonias, and an Abyssal Scepter. You'll get a really good offensive activation from the Protobelt and a really solid defensive one from the Zonias. You'll of course also get a ton of ability power and 30% CDR, which is pretty fantastic. Then finally, of course, you'll also have some pretty good defensives because you'll have armor, magic resist, and a decent health pool. Now alternatively, you could go for Rod of the Ages and a Morellonomicon. The Rod of Ages is fantastic on Lissandra because you get that catalyst which can really help with your mana sustain. Of course, you'll have a decent mana pool and, of course, health pool. I'll really only go for these two items if I do need the Morellonomicon for the Grievous Wounds. But then for your boot options, you have Sork Shoes if you want some magic penetration, or Ionian Boots if you need 10% more CDR. For the item pool, of course, first, since you are an AP carry, would be the Rabadon's Death Cap. If you're looking to hard carry games, you need as much ability power as possible, then you'll need to get a Rabadon's. Next up, we have the Void Staff, which is fantastic when people start getting some magic resist, so you can get through it and still do a nice chunk of damage. If you're against a pretty tanky lineup, then you could go for Liandry's as well, because it does have some nice burn damage on health, and of course some extra magic penetration. Then, if you want to be a little bit more bursty and spend more time roaming, you could get Luden's Echo. Not an item I take too often myself, but if I need to spend a lot of time roaming, I will pick it up for that damage and movement speed. Then finally, like every other champion, you could get a Guardian Angel. It's a fantastic late game item because it gives you a defensive which can make you come back to life and allow you to do some more damage. For my example full build though, I take the core build, add Ionian Boots to get CDR capped, and then Rabadon's Death Cap, and Void Staff. You'll be able to do an absolute ton of damage and have some extra burst from the Protobelt, and a really solid defensive from the Zonias. But that is everything I've got for mid lane Lissandra. Don't forget to check out the video description below for a link to all my social medias. I stream every night but Tuesday at 7 PM Eastern now, and of course that link is down there. As is my Discord server and my second YouTube channel. Also, if you guys did enjoy the video, please make sure you like and subscribe, but other than that, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys did enjoy it, and I will see you in the next one. Take it easy, have a good day, and peace.